So as Amitai shared with you, and I wish I could just do this in slide deck. I tried making that selection and it doesn't want to play along. A while back, a very good friend of mine pointed me at the company that I'm currently acting as an independent contractor through. And I get to play with lots of different clients. And I get to do this thing called Dojo. And this isn't the dojo that you may have already encountered in various contexts, like a day's worth or less than a day's worth. This is a little different. And I'm going to run you through exactly how it's different. The who, the what, the why, and the how, and not necessarily entirely in that order. So we'll just start with who am I? And if I could actually click to add notes. No, I don't want to click to add notes. I should already have notes. So you've already got the introduction that's all about me. And so that part would be boring. So I'm not going to bother you with more of that. But basically, as the beard would attest, I've been around for a while. And this thing that I'm doing now and that I want to share with each of you really, really impressed me. And that's why I basically signed up. I get to work with some amazing people like David Larrabee, Nate Ashford, Jesse Riley, and probably a few folks that might actually be on this call, although I don't necessarily see any of them now, but there may be too many for me to see. And Dave and Nate are the two people who convinced me to join this company that is where David Hussman's Dev Jam went before he passed away. He managed to pass away from terminal lung cancer. It was a very, very sorry thing that he did because he was an amazing individual that I would like very much to have met myself, but I did not have that privilege. Here's the thing though. Nate and Dave convinced me to join C Prime even before they met me. And the way they did that was a video, which is going to be in the links at the very, very bottom, that describes in excruciating detail, in over an hour, here's exactly the anatomy of what's called a challenge dojo. It's not like what other dojos are like. And what I mean by that, so also before we get into exactly what it is, who are the clients? The clients typically are, as you might expect, in fact, Amitai, I believe it was you that actually put on something that was titled something to the effect of there are no more early adopters for Agile. Well, this is those companies. They're big companies. They have, one could argue, more money than sense, but they pay the bills and I'm loving it. And I get to help individuals and teams. So I'm loving it that much more. So that's who the clients are. They tend to be very large companies who have lots of interesting wrinkles, let's say. So now you should be looking at this. What is this challenge dojo? And here's the thing. There's just two inviolate rules. The participants will work entirely together, which, yes, that means mob or ensemble programming. They will deliver working software every 2 days, 2.5 days if you want to be particular, 5-day week. Or if they only want to do it every 2 days, that's fine. And then they can take Friday off if they want to, but that's up to them. Now, it's at about this point that we get the Princess Bride response, inconceivable. Like 2 days, they're used to 2 weeks, most of it, not all of them. And that's where the stuff gets really interesting, because it's very, very intentionally a forcing factor. The idea is to radically change their world in ways that will serve their purpose. So other than that, besides 2-day iterations and everyone working together with a working process limit of 1, there's something else that's different about it. It's 4 to 6 weeks long. It's not a day, it's not 2 days, it's not a weekend. It's a duration. And there's lots of really good reasons that we'll get into for why that is. But before we do that, let me go down to what is the difference? And I've just hit upon some of them. So everyone working together, yes, that's ensemble. And the sprint is 2 days long. But here's something else that's different. When you think of a code retreat, when you think of other forms of dojos, it's almost always around kadas, practice exercises. They may span the gamut from FizzBuzz Plus, global, life, Conway's Game of Life, and refactoring katas like tennis and all these scoring games. That's not what we do. We might actually revert to that if there's a big skill gap, but we don't expect that, because there's also some stuff, some activities besides the challenge dojo that precedes this, that is intended to fill the skill gaps to at least the level of familiarity to where they can function. And then the dojo, which has this duration of 4 weeks to 6 weeks, becomes practice, practice, practice. And you say, well, wait a minute, if there's no kadas, practice on what? The answer is their actual work, but done in a way they never imagined that they could. That's the point. So if you're used to sizing a story when you know you've got a 2-week bag to put it in, it's probably not going to be sliced very thin. So the whole point of these 2-day things is, what can you actually deliver to wherever it is you get the power to deliver things to? Not all of them in organizations of this type get to deliver it into production. Some do, some don't. But deliver it completely ready to rock and roll, tested, the whole 9 yards. The testing is the documentation, what have you. So the focus is also about a little bit on delivery, but it's mostly on the learning. We probably repeat several times during the course of the dojo, it's learning over delivery. Now, one of the things that happens as a result of that is there have to be some very serious negotiations that take place, both with their leadership and their stakeholders, before the challenge dojo even can be agreed to begin. We negotiate a 50% reduction in their velocity. Doesn't always happen that way. In fact, sometimes it actually picks up in the course of the dojo. But for the most part, the point is to create this space for new learning to happen. If you don't do that, there just ain't no way. So that's exactly how we go about doing it. So let me see if I've missed anything, looking at my notes real quickly. Okay, I think we've covered that one. What else is special? Here's something that a lot of people don't understand about the concept of where dojo comes from. As most of the people on this call almost certainly know, dojo is taken from the martial arts. And technically, it has two parts, do and the jo. Do can mean practice, art, the way, method, or path. It can mean any of those things in there because the translation is from Japanese, where it comes from, and probably Chinese as well. But the point is, that's the dojo part. And the jo literally just means the place. So it means the place of the way. This is the place that you should have, that you go to learn whatever it is that you're there to learn. Now, when we were doing this pre-COVID, pre everyone on the planet having to be online all the time, it was a little easier. You could literally create a physical space in the, okay, we're getting some notes on the screen here. Oops, would someone like to say what it is they're drawing on the screen? I'm seeing it anyway. I don't know if anyone else is, and I can't read it.
Looks like somebody in grade school or middle school, Bob.
Or just using a mouse.
Okay, so you now know that, yes, it is possible to draw on the screen in Zoom. It's a Zoom feature. It's quite handy sometimes. Thanks, Eddie, for pointing out that's what it is. I knew what it was. I just didn't know who was doing it. So thank you. If that was not a signal to say, hold on, there's something you didn't cover, then I'll move on. So dojo means the place, the place of the way. And the way is the thing that we're trying to teach new practices with. So if we're ready with that, I'll move on. Probably help if I was there. So no kadas, instead it's their actual work. So kadas are really great as a mechanism for learning the mechanics of a process. TDD, BDD, gherkin, step definitions, story mapping, and artificial problems that everyone actually has some level of experience with. That's why FizzBuzz and vending machines are currently used as the basis for a kata, is because it's something that everyone's familiar with. What you're trying to do is keep the cognitive load low while someone is learning a new practice, a way of going about doing something. And that would be great if you were doing it, say, in a code retreat where it's one day. Here's the problem. All of you have probably done a code retreat in some fashion or a dojo of some variety. What often happens is people will find, yeah, that was great, I'm going to do that, all gung ho. And then the environment kicks in and the pressure is on and you're under the gun and no, I kind of have to go back to what I know works. Well, that's one of the reasons that we don't use katas. We do their actual work. So it's something they should be somewhat familiar with, at least the tools and the mechanics that they use. But we're going to teach them new ways of working with one another, ways of working with the code, thin slicing, instead of 2 weeks, 2 days. These are the things that kind of take them off balance. And that's okay. That's exactly where we want them, is off balance, so that they can start to get a little bit more comfortable with being off balance and willing to experiment. So There are two classes or trainings that actually precede the Challenge Dojo. Those are designed to introduce the mechanics to the team members or to refresh memories in the cases of folks that haven't been using them on, say, this team, or as much as they would like, perhaps. These are separate from the Challenge Dojo itself, separate from the 4 to 6 weeks. And there's no way to get a leadership to agree to zero delivery for an entire 4 to 6 weeks. That's why we negotiate the 50% reduction. You have to create some space for the learning, and that is all done in advance of even accepting a team for the dojo. We get to say, no, this team's not ready. And that's a very powerful thing to have available in your quiver. So moving right along, why is it so long? 4 to 6 weeks. Why is that good? Well, you know that habits take a while to actually kick in. You know about something called the J curve, probably. You learn something new, you are proceeding along and you're all happy, and someone says, oh, let's try doing it this way. And there's a bunch of stuff you don't know, so your productivity goes, whoa, takes a nosedive. And then you kind of get familiar and you, okay, I can do this. Oh, well, yeah, I can do this okay. Oh, wow, this is even better. And the J curve is that hockey stick, if you will, that starts out, you lose productivity initially, but you get it back. And if it really is of value, you get more productivity by whatever means you choose to measure. You feel good about what you're doing. You get, I don't know, more tests written. You get better tests, maybe. You get better stories coming out that you can actually understand. All of those things. These are all the kinds of things that we touch on in a Challenge Dojo. Not just technical skills, but product, I guess, technical skills as well. Story slicing and like. So that's the reason for 4 to 6 weeks, because we want people not only to learn how to do it, but to have enough repetition to where the J curve in small bites, 2 days at a time, another 2 days, another 2 days, for them to get the practice they need to actually accelerate what they're able to do, to run with it, not run with scissors, but good joke, but anyway. So that's the reason for the 4 to 6 weeks. Now, why does the team choose the focus? This is something I haven't touched on yet, and we're going to actually see an example of that coming up in the coming slide. There's conversations with both the leadership for the team, because that negotiation that I was referring to a few minutes ago, plus getting to understand what's the landscape around them. How does their world work? Where are the landmines? Where are the dysfunctions? That kind of things. But then also, what are their tools? How long have they been on the team? How many people are on the teams? Where are they in the world? Are they in California and in India? That would be crazy. There are people who do it. Or are they, say, on the West Coast and on the East Coast? And that at least is manageable. So you have to find out all these sorts of things. And when you do, you come up with sort of an inventory of things that the coaches think these might actually help. And here's some good general purpose things like TDD and story slicing and example mapping and all those good things that just for general purpose. And then when you actually engage with the team during the Challenge Dojo, you'll give them this laundry list, and they get to say which ones they want to learn more about. They also get to say which things some of them already know about. So this is part of what's called charting. We get the team name, we get the framing, the story maps, working agreements, skills matrix. Skills matrix is what I was just referring to. This is a process that we go through to actually help them narrow to 2 or 3 different things, maybe as many as 4 or 5 in the course of the 4 to 6 weeks, but we'll only be really primarily focused on a very, very narrow subset of those to begin with, say in week 1 and in week 2 and in week 3, each of them. The idea is to keep the cognitive load to where they don't feel like they're overwhelmed. Because as any game designer will tell you, to achieve flow, it can't be too challenging and it can't be so boring that they will just want to go do something else. And that's the sweet spot that we try to find. So let me take you down to this, which is the skills matrix. This is an example of one that's actually appeared. This is ripped off from the video that I referred to you earlier, which is going to be in the links. Not to worry. Everything that I'm talking about is in the links in the PDF version of this deck, as you're seeing it right now, that will be made available following the event. So I've already shared that with Amitai. So if you look at the column here, you'll see that you might not be able to read it particularly well, but basically those are skill areas. And the funny looking things in each of the rows, the people with pictures appear in the column to the left. That's each individual on the team has a row. And the intersection of the row and the skill allows them to tell us one of 4 things. I want it. This is something that I realize has value, but I don't have very much knowledge or any knowledge in this particular skill area. I've got it already, but not at a level where I could actually feel confident teaching it. And then the next level, I can teach this. Yeah, I totally got this. I can live and breathe this stuff. And finally, the 4th example, which is, you'll notice there's some blank cells here, like here, and here, and here. That means, yeah, not much interested in that. Now, when we're in the dojo, the coaches, and I use that term very advisedly, it's always 2 coaches. There's always coaches that are pairing with one another. And usually one is product focused and has a lot of their skill area in that area. And the other is technical focused and has most of their skill in that area. But they're both pretty capable in both areas. They're experienced coaches. But here's the thing. What we look for is columns that have a lot of interest, at least one I can teach this instance that's already on the team, and very little, nah, this is not relevant for us. Like, meh. Those are the ones that we want to help the team get moving on. We can do the stuff that they don't have any expertise in, but usually what we want to do, and the reason that we want to do it this way, is we want, while we're there, help to promote people that have skills to a level of visibility so that they have local champions for whatever that practice is. Things like doing your documentation by actually writing Gherkin. Well, writing Gherkin, that just means we're writing a test. Yeah, it's just writing a test. But it can also be your documentation, and it's executable, and it's versioned, and it's checked in. Why wouldn't you do it that way? People learn it. They usually go for it. So that's what this image is about. And again, this is in the video that you'll get an access to afterwards. So moving on. Let's see, did I miss anything. Well, everybody is online. We used Mural or Miro to do this. I didn't want to share any of that stuff because I didn't want to have to cross out names or blur things and that kind of silliness. But this particular image in the video that I say that Nate Ashford and Dave Larrabee convinced me to come join this company even before they met me, it was this particular slide that really cemented it for me. Every single thing that is in that video and that I'm describing to you here tonight is practices that I've seen at least once somewhere else. What I had never seen, though, was how it was all packaged and put together in a very logical order, in a very functional order, and to great effect. And I have confirmed that firsthand because I've been doing this since, I think, March of this year, almost a year. So that's what's special for me about this illustration. All right, so how do we keep it going? How do we start to get out of the way? Well, you remember that 2-day sprint thing? That's how we keep it fresh. We're constantly pushing them to say, well, what can you actually get done and deliver in just 2 days? That really forces. So a bunch of you here are software crafts people that do code retreats and know some of the very common constraints that a code retreat facilitator will use, including one called taking baby steps. Would anyone from the audience like to offer up, in what situation would you typically pull out the constraint taking baby steps? I'll wait for an answer if anyone would care to. You might have to unmute.
So if I saw some people going about things in such a way that they were using the test just as an excuse to go write some code and not necessarily balancing, between failing tests and just enough code, I mean, that occurs to me as time I'd want to pull it out.
Anyone else?
I had situations where, for example, a team is working on a code base and they are starting to get in a situation where code is not compiling, and instead of fixing it, they are going further and further away from working state. And this is where I would do something like that. Like, no, stop, go back, and let's keep it working all the time and make smaller steps, something like that.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, basically they're biting off more than they can chew, and they're not staying true to the get to green as quickly as you possibly can and then make it better. That aspect of test-driven development. And the 2-minute rule that comes with taking baby steps is within 2 minutes, that pair or team, in the case of a mob, has to write a test, see that the test fails, demonstrate that it can fail. You haven't got something stupid like true equals true. And then you have to make it go green by whatever means in under 2 minutes. And when I was doing this physically in a physical space, I'd say, I want to hear those timers going off. If I don't hear timers, I'm going to be asking a lot of questions. Because that's the essence of it. Inside of 2 minutes, you have to throw away the code if you didn't make it and start again. Narrow, narrow, narrow the focus. That's the point of taking baby steps as a technique, as a constraint. Well, that's essentially what we're doing with 2-day sprints, is we're narrowing the focus. They're used to thinking in bags this big. Now we're giving them a bag, lunch pail, not even lunch pail size. So That's what changes things. And again, that's why we get the inconceivable. So, all right, what else? Probably a good idea if I did it this way. Oh, don't do that. I'm not trying to edit you. I just want to go to the next one. Here we go. Now, how do we finish? Well, finishing is an interesting concept because we also come back and make ourselves available to the team even after the 4 to 6 weeks dojo. We practice a little bit of Llewellyn's, be fully embedded with them all the time for a period of time, and then go away for a little while and see how well they do when you're not there. And if they're doing well, then you did your job well. That's a pretty good metric for a coach to use. How do they do when you're not there? So before we finish, we have the team do a few things. And we do this periodically throughout the course of that 4 to 6 weeks. We do something called we have them do a share. So what's the share thing? It's where they're demoing to stakeholders, to leadership, and to the teams that they work with. But one of the things they're demoing is not just what it is that they've accomplished, which is what you would typically have for a demo, but they're also sharing what they have learned and how they feel about that learning. And for the final share, because there are multiple over the course of this period, the final one has a special characteristic. They're asked to agree upon and put it into their team agreement, a declaration of how certain characteristics, certain practices that they have learned in the course of this dojo are things that they're willing to take forward after the dojo. And that is really, really, really richly rewarding when they decide, oh, the favorite thing that I really saw them embrace and enjoy. I can tell if they carry that forward successfully, they're going to continue to get the joy from that. Mob programming is personally one of my favorite things, as Dimitri can probably attest. Good evening, Dimitri. Very late evening for you, sir. But this is the kind of stuff that we do. And when we do this stuff, what makes me really, really rejoice is the fact that people came in not knowing quite what to expect, not knowing once they found out what was expected, how they were going to be able to do it, maybe even living in denial, and slowly but surely embracing it and getting into a pattern and actually taking it with them when they leave. When they leave the dojo and they go back to the day job and all the dysfunctions, that is how we do a dojo, a challenge dojo. And now you understand what the challenge is because they choose the challenge. They choose when to do it. We just facilitate. And that's a pretty sweet space to be in. So I'm going to move to questions because apparently I talked too fast or I didn't have enough, but I'd like to leave lots and lots of room for questions. My caveat, my disclaimer here is that this presentation is not the definitive way of doing. There is no one right way to do anything in our space, and that's true of the Challenge Dojo as well. We find that we are constantly inspecting and adapting it for this client, adapting it for this team, adapting it for what they have available to them. And sometimes that feels good, like a genuine adaptation, and we're being true to the spirit. And sometimes we're kind of, man, if we can't engage with these folks, they ain't never going to get out of that hole. But we always make it work. So I'm going to shut up and listen for questions. You might have to unmute.
Hi, Bob. Oh, sorry. Do we have to put our hands up first? Or
You can put hands up.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So first, I really like your point about intrinsic, intrinsic reasons to improve. And certainly the matrix seems a really interesting way to kind of measure progress. Yeah, it'd be great to hear a bit more about kind of, because we're reviews and kind of people working towards getting a review and having clear steps on how they can improve. And I suppose the matrix would be one way of helping team members to work towards improving and showing and showing they've improved.
So Tom, actually, you've done a great job of reminding me of something that I failed to cover, and that is that we asked the team to come back to the skills matrix at the end of the dojo and move their cards around. We want them to be very, very, very conscious of what changes have occurred in the way that they do things and what they are now comfortable with. That they started out maybe saying, yeah, I want it. And maybe they end up with, I got it. Like, that is a sweet place. Esther.
So I'd like to go back to the final presentation that you mentioned, because at the very beginning you talked about how the sponsor, the product owners, the managers have to make some commitment to create space for learning. So
Yes.
I'm wondering if at the end, when the team commits to what their practices they're going to carry forward, do the sponsors and managers also make commitments? Perhaps to how they'll keep space open for learning, or how they'll keep organizational barriers at bay, because very often holding on to a practice is difficult when the organizational gravity and the organizational whatever is going on works against it. So that's my kind of long question.
Yeah, no, and very, very much appreciated. It's a good one. And gravity, I think, is probably the really good analogy, because when gravity kicks in at more than 50%, so to speak, or drag, or whatever you want to call it, that's when they fall down, right? So that's a perfect analogy. The short answer to your question, the one that I try to propose to the team, is stop asking permission, put a stake in the ground and declare this is what we're going to do. And there's only two outcomes from that. Either they get away with it and they do it and they follow through, or they don't. And if they don't, it's probably because they were never going to be able to get away with it no matter what. But don't ask permission. Just put a stake in the ground and say, this is what we as a team have agreed we're going to do going forward. And we predict from our own firsthand experience, the things that we were learning, we have gotten better at. And we not only see value to us, we see value in terms of the quality of the stories and the quality of the code and the quality of the test. And those are things that we will be bringing back with us as we go forward. So they make the case. We just do our best to stand them up and say, let us know how we can help you. For instance, right now I'm working with a team where they clearly have a very capable leader who isn't identified as a leader in any context. And we've been doing our best to help promote this person by virtue of, and I don't mean promote in the monetary context, because we don't have anything along those lines, but make what they have to offer more visible to all, so that they become everyone else's champion. And if we can help to affect or nudge that, that can be a very positive thing for the team in general, when they have natural leaders that they haven't really tapped. And that's as common as dirt, because we're experiencing it even right now. Eddie, you have your hand up, sir.
Yes, thanks, Bob. I've got one kind of tangential to what Esther was talking about. And I'm wondering, is it ever the case that you try to align, like the overall effort would align leadership coaching of some sort with the team going through a dojo challenge?
Funny you should ask. Yes, actually, one of our ulterior motives is to actually identify potential internal coaches for that client among their own employees. And our ulterior motive there is, if they develop an appetite for running dojos, they'll ask us to come back repeatedly to help them get that coaching practice itself started up, which is a huge win for them and for us, which is kind of a nice place to be. So where we can make that happen, some companies have totally run with that. I believe it's Nate Ashby was telling me as recently as yesterday or today about a client that he's dealing with that is really enthused about not just what we do, but with them doing it. They start from the get-go. They want to create an in-house coaching practice. That, woo, that would be a great client to work with.
Ashby or Ashford?
Ashford, I'm sorry, did I say Ashby?
You did, yeah. I'm just making it clear.
Yeah. So yeah, that was Nate. Other questions, and by the way, Esther, did I answer your question? I should always complete what I think is an answer with that. Unless you found something else that you have to do. So in which case.
No, I'm still here. I just moved from rooms and was reconnecting cables. So I certainly agree that having teams make commitments to what they plan to do and not asking permission makes sense. I mean, I don't advocate teams asking permission, but I wonder about the reciprocal commitment kind of thing. I think that my question was more in the spirit of, we're asking teams to commit to something. Are we also asking managers and sponsors to commit to something?
Yes.
Okay.
So we try to set up management with all of the outcomes that we hope to achieve and that we have experienced in the past, in order to smooth the road, to pave the road for that possibility. So yeah, great question. We've hit enough potholes that we have a pretty good idea what to set up in advance. Anybody else? Oh, Mr. Riley is with us.
I was trying to stay hidden, Bob.
Too bad, man. You can't hide.
Just kind of hanging out.
Oh, I'm so glad you are. So If you were here for the whole thing, and I don't know if you were, because I wasn't paying that much attention. I was trying to read my stupid slide deck. Call me out on anything I missed, man, or I totally flubbed. By all means. call me
Everything
out.
is a lie. No, I only caught the tail end because I had some other things going on, but I wanted to make sure I snuck in and
So glad you're here, man. So glad you're here.
God, I can make it.
So-
Bob, this is Christopher from Calgary. Hello. May I interrupt with a question?
Please do, sir.
You have indicated potholes. My question was going to be presented as a quantitative one. What metrics do you have for your rate of success? But I'm not so much interested in the numbers, but in what stories you have to tell about what has surprised you, what things have gone really, really well, and what potholes, things that could be described as obstacles, but maybe weren't, have you encountered on this journey you've been making?
Sure. I have a long list, but I'll keep it short. Some of my favorite stories, because they're turnaround stories. I don't want to discourage you with stories where it just went to hell in a handbasket. There have been some of those. But basically, we eject. If we see something like this team totally cannot be present because they are completely underwater. They have a backlog from hell and a giant release smack in the middle of the dojo that wasn't supposed to be there. We had that conversation, and yet here it is. And we basically had to pull the ripcord on them and say, they can come back another time, but like, we're out, we're done.
Right, okay.
So that's one case. Another case would be, we had one team that was, I think, 100% consultants. So not a lot of skin in the game.
Mm.
But they were also pretty good. But in at least one case, the person who had a lot of gravitas on that team, mostly because they talked a lot, and people just sort of got used to it and didn't even try to undo that, was very set in their way of, no, I don't like to work in a mob. I need my space. I'm a designer. I've got to have my time. And they didn't want anything to do with the mob at all.
Okay.
By the end of the dojo, quite happily, by the end of the first week, they were starting to come around.
Oh.
By the end of the dojo, they were one of the biggest champions for everything that we had done. And it was like, holy crap. I can't believe that those words came from that individual, but it did. The more common pattern
Mm-hmm.
is people can't get their heads wrapped around an experience they've never had.
Yeah.
Most of what we're teaching is something they haven't ever done. Maybe one or two or three people on an entire team of maybe 10 or 12 people. And that's the other thing that happens is sometimes you get big teams. Some clients really like to have big teams. And I'm not even going to go there. What will happen is we'll split them up, but not for the first week. We want all of them working together all the time. But the method that seems to work when you have to split them up, because they're like 12 or 15 people, it's crazy.
Yeah.
You can't mob that way. By the time you become the driver again in an ensemble context, you've gone and had lunch and, forget it. You lost interest. You certainly disengaged, and you've probably lost any interest.
Right.
So we'll split them up. But here's the thing. When we have them identify themselves, put a name on a ticket and says, okay, here's what I am, here's what my role is, we'll have them use a different color card. This is on Miro or on Miro, so that you can, at the beginning of a day or the iteration, you can say, okay, so for today, who's going to be in the so-and-so room or the other room? You've got two rooms, like you would in Zoom or you would in Teams or any number of other meeting kinds of things. And we'll make sure that we have a balance of different skill sets in each room, so that unavoidably there's learning going on, there's cross-fertilization. That's the mechanism that we've found when you have a big team that you can actually make work fairly effectively.
Awesome.
Jesse, you got anything to throw in there that is a technique you've seen, or a horror story or a success story?
I got it. All of the above.
I'll bet you do, in spades.
Yeah, in many spades. Yeah, to what Bob was saying, there are some teams that are just too big, and you kind of get a feel for that right off the bat, not only from the numbers, but the different skill sets are in there and everything else. And sometimes that's just literally there's 5, 10, 15, 20 developers in a team, and there's some natural delineations that occur on that. And other times it's well, we're dev and QA, and you're like those two things should marry those together, please. And it's a great opportunity to show them how those two worlds combine. Not only that, how they're so similar, y'all just haven't been talking to each other. You're doing the same work, you just don't realize it. And once that jump happens for those groups, then it doesn't matter that you have a large team so much, because now the cross-pollination has occurred, people are a little bit more aware, and then they start to ask other more interesting questions. And that's like the whole thing of like, oh, well, you're a waterfall team, you're an agile team, you're a product team, and now you're kind of like, you jump to like design thinking, right? So you never know what you're going to get. You may end up with a UX, group inside of a team that doesn't really belong there. I know that sounds weird, but you'll get that too. It's like, oh, we should do something different with you, because maybe your words are different, but you're actually going after this thing over here. So there's a little bit of calibration with teams that are very large. Now, that being said, anything we can do to stack the deck on that and make sure that those teams are set up for success is even better. We just don't always have that as a dojo.
Yeah.
We can't always go, hey, this team's too big, fix it.
Yeah. So
Imagine also, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to Jesse's point, we take the cards we're dealt and we adapt. And we know quite a number of ways to go about doing that. And Jesse's right. Sometimes you'll have a team that's 15 people and 12 of them are all developers. And 2 of them are like UX people, and they're going, I have no idea what I'm doing here.
Right.
Are there any common strategies for breaking those large groups up, like maybe dual track or something like that?
Yes, but populating at least one person. Okay, so you got 15 people, 12 of them are developers, but what kind of developer are they? Oh, well, I'm a front-end developer. I'm a back-end developer. I'm a database geek. Great. Different colors, mix the colors. You can see in one column that says, these are the people going to room X. Let's have a rainbow there. I want as much mixing as we can possibly get going. Some people will be bored a little bit, but then they kind of get engaged because, they have intellects. And you want to use those. And we're not gentle about it. It's like, no, we're quite insistent.
Bob's gentle about it. I'm not.
No, I'm not gentle about it either, but I might ask twice before I say, no, this is where you're going to go. Boom.
Hello,
Peter. Nice to see you.
Well, this experience that you were talking about earlier, about this person, this designer, right? That was not able to, didn't want to take part in this. So this setup, was it virtual or physical?
The setup is entirely virtual, always,
Always.
because COVID. And
Okay.
almost all of our teams are predominantly US, but many of them have an India base as well. And the ones where it's East Coast and India, that's at least workable. When they go completely silly is when they have people on the West Coast and India, literally on the opposite sides of the planet from one another. But we try to school them on such things like, don't do that.
So, and what is usually the number of or the maximum number that in your experience that work better?
We have actually rejected teams and said, you need to reorganize this into an actual team, and said, when you're ready, bring them on back as something that's a more rational size. And Jesse's the one that has probably more of the setting up the leadership for scheduling teams than I have. I usually just, where do I go on which day, Jesse? Right? And I'm there. But Jesse's the one that lines up all the ducks.
Yeah, I've kicked out is not that's too strong of a word. But I have literally during the intake process told them, for those of you that are not on this particular thing, this is not going to be for you. Because, oh, we're on this project and this project and this project, I'm like, okay, that's too many projects. Sorry.
Yeah, one person on multiple projects. Oh, I hate that. With a passion.
And that team that I did that with was one of the best teams we had seen. Because all of a sudden now you had focus, you had a small team. It went from 12 or so people to like 5. And it was really easy for people to say that's not a good idea. You have 12 people, that's pretty hard. That's a pretty hard lift. But when it's 5 and 3 people, like right out of the gate, like, nah, I think that's silly. All of a sudden now you can actually try those things quicker, faster, easier, leaner, meaner, without too much drama. Because that person's like, okay, there's only a few people and I don't feel like I've been, dragged out in the dirt in front of everybody. Kind of a good thing. But as you start moving on, they start realizing, oh, right now's the time for me to throw that in the hat. And now we can do that thing I wanted to do. It just might not have been the right time. So there's multiple head fakes in there, which is kind of fun.
Yep.
See, and one other thought I have is that if the projects that you have worked, if they are very large projects, because for instance, this kind of thing in my company right now, or in my department at least, it's kind of crazy because just to, I cannot, I suppose I'm not breaking any rule, but just to have like one of the phases, one of the, let's the builds, one of the product builds, takes like, let's say 4 hours to run.
Okay, there's a smell.
So I guess if you want to have, I think you have to work that out first before you try something like this. Otherwise, it's just people, even if they do they go through the pipeline until a certain stage, they are not able to have something ready for release or something. So, but that's something that I guess we have to work on.
So that's one of the things that ends up getting discussed probably before Dojo, Challenge Dojo or otherwise, is leadership. You really need to reorganize your teams because you've got kind of a mess here. Not only things like you've got people on opposite sides of the planet, but you've got people, say, in a services team. This is a very common model. We've seen this many times where, yeah, this programmer owns this service and this other programmer owns this other service and this one owns this database. And no one else knows anything about this service, that service, or this database. And that's a bus or truck problem just waiting to happen.
Lottery.
Or lottery problem, it's the nice version. So yeah. Dave, what's going on, bud?
Yes, I have a question about what happens after the dojo. So let's say they, dojo for 4 or 6 weeks really isn't that long. So they get out of the dojo, they go back and what? And you also mentioned coaches, you coach the coach, right? But when does that happen also? Is that after they start learning tech practices? I know delivery is important. I know that discovery is important in that. Discovery, making good stories. What about the tech side of it though? What happens? When are they ready to be coaches? What happens after they get out?
So the short answer to your question is shadowing. What we'll do is if we're working with a client long-term and they have expressed an interest in actually developing their internal resources, and we've done this with multiple clients, is we'll have them basically be a fly on the wall while we're coaching an engagement so they can see multiple teams being coached and get a sense of this is the structure of it, exactly as has been described tonight. But also, here's different coaching styles that I've actually witnessed firsthand, and I get it. And once they have gotten through a few of those, their leadership may ask the C prime coaches to say, are these guys ready? And they might not ask, and they might not be ready. That's happened as well.
Yeah, so there's coaching styles and communication and influencing, right? But what about the tech side of it? So if they're learning stuff like TDD or mobbing and stuff like that, clean code, it takes a while to learn that, right? So I mean, do we say they're ready to be coaches when they haven't really done much of that yet, or how does that work?
Well, in my experience, someone who was being proposed or who expressed a desire, either themselves or their leadership saying, I want this person to become a coach, that didn't have the skills that were necessary, we would do our damnedest to actually validate that perception, if that was the understanding or the belief, help them in any way that we could to build them up quickly, and otherwise just say, that would be a bad idea because they're not really ready for prime time, either on the basis of technical skills or on the basis of coaching skills. We get to say, yeah, I know you do want that, but that would be a bad idea. I advise against it.
Cool, thanks.
Christopher, it looks like you might have a question. But you're muted.
So I am unmuting myself. Yeah, simply noting you're sharing your screen, and I'm finding I'm looking at an inch by inch part of my screen. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind stopping your sharing, unless there is value in sharing your slides at this point.
No, I can absolutely stop sharing.
That's
Happy to do
Thank
so.
you.
How's that? Now I get to see all the lovely people, including Peek, who doesn't have her camera turned on. Which
Yeah,
is
sorry,
okay.
Bob. I'm in Thailand this December, so I'm
Oh,
not-
congratulations.
Yeah.
Peek is one of my regulars at my Codecraft Saturdays. That's why I called her out. Hey, Dimitri. Man, you're up late.
Yeah, hi Bob, nice to see you.
Dimitri's in Munich.
Yeah.
Oh, so happy to see so many familiar faces. Did everyone get some part, if not all, of what they came for? Esther.
I have another question.
Please.
So when you talk about having people shadow the coaches and just watch what you're doing, do you also work out loud so they are beginning to understand why you make certain decisions, why you take certain actions? So they're getting some of the implicit knowledge in that transfer?
We certainly attempt to. I know that, first of all, even without any shadows, there's always two coaches, with rare exception, and that is primary focus of product, primary focus of tech, and a lot of overlap between the two. But then when you have shadows, when it's just the two of them, you've always got a side channel going on. Like, for instance, for most of our teams, we're either using Zoom or we're using Teams or something else like that. That's what their company provides for working remotely as a group, or even WebEx Teams. Anyway, but separate from that, and very, very, very intentionally separate from that, we may keep a side channel of communication open just between the coaches. And that will include the shadow coaches. Typically, that would be Slack. And that allows us to, hey, little virtual elbow. Did you think about so-and-so? You forgot to do this, something along those lines. And when we do that, we answer questions like, if there's someone who's currently in a group setting, coaching, and they're running with the ball, you may have a question come up from a shadow and you attempt to answer that in real space. But then in addition, there's always jam sessions for all of the coaches related to a particular client. And there's often a Slack or a Teams chat group that's on the client's system that allows us to have dialogues with those shadows that are just coaches to coaches. And the C prime coaches and the client coaches will be on there together. That's how that's usually handled.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback on that too. When I'm working with teams and I am seeing a pattern that I know is coming up, right? Like, I know we're going to go here to here to here to here to here to here to here. We have to get here. It's going to take a minute. I will message the other coaches involved and say, just so you know, this is the path I'm going right now. One, it helps not only another coach to reinforce that path, regardless if they agree with it or not, regardless if they think that is the perfect path at that point in time. That doesn't matter. The fact of it is that there's a flow, there's a direction in that way, whatever that is. The other coach can kind of run defense on a couple things. Maybe they can add in their own experiences in a few spots. Then on top of that, other coaches that are observing, shadowing, trying to level up, trying to get into that space can see the thought process that they may not even be aware of that they had. That just kind of starts to, like, they have to now concrete that in some way. They say, oh, yeah, I could see how you could get there. And then they see the steps. They may have not have thought about that ever before. And this is where, like, the level of are you really ready for the coach thing versus, okay, you can start to do it versus you can do this in your sleep. That's the differences that I see from a coach that probably shouldn't be there to a coach that's like, you'd be all right, to holy crap, yeah, you just, like, here's where we're going, you can take over when you want. So there's this back and forth on the back channels, and I cannot stress the thing enough of what Bob just said, of, like, that back channel has to happen because you may not have worked with them before. You may not really know that that's the direction they're going. Then all of a sudden you're like, okay, their words are slightly different than mine, but I get it.
Yeah. And Jesse, thank you. You just reminded me of something else that I had in the notes and I didn't call out. And that is, one of the answers to the question, why 4 to 6 weeks? Why do we go for so long? When there's new learning, there's not only the need to get it under your belt and start to turn it into a habit, but there's also different levels of insight and understanding. Like, oh, I just realized the reason we're doing TDD is not for the test. It's because it's an incremental way of thinking about what I'm going to need next and then being able to execute on it. And the test just come along for the ride. Like, whoa, insight, yay. So that's one of the other reasons for giving them the time to actually apply the practices. So outside, the shadows get the benefit of outside contacts, and we have conversations, and we can have one-on-ones with the shadows as well. All those things are game. But we try to help them be successful, because if they're successful, guess what? They're going to invite us back. Dimitri, you look like you might have a question.
Yeah, sure. So actually, I'd like to know, after they experience ensemble programming during 4 to 6 weeks every day, can they keep doing ensemble programming? What is the most frequent outcome? Do you have any idea?
I'm not sure it's as high as 50%, but we've actually seen any number of teams. Here's the most common answer to that question. The most common things that we're told a team is doing after the dojo. They'll conclude and put a stake in the ground and said, we're going to do ensemble programming at this frequency. Maybe it's 1 day a week, maybe it's for 1 week a month. It could be anything in between, and it might be 100% all the time. And we've seen probably all of those ranges. So there isn't just one answer.
Well, but
I don't have a metric to say what percentage for each.
Yeah, I see. But for me, actually, pairing or mobbing is related to TDD, because for me, the complexity, a lot of more problems covered at once is much easier to do in a team. And therefore, for me, TDD is perfectly doable in a team, but it's pretty hard if I should code on my own. And for me, these things are related. So for me, TDD and pairing are correlated, at least.
Excellent. I am delighted that you feel that way. It is possible to do on your own, but I agree, it's harder. Ping pong is much more fun, because ping pong as a pairing style is a little bit gamified, to where you're like the evil programmer technique. You write a test and your pair has to, in the ping pong context, has to satisfy the test. And your pair does the stupidest possible interpretation of your poorly written test.
Yes, I know. And for me, TDD is not just way to think. It's above all way to communicate. Because if I need to communicate my idea, I need to come up with example to be understood in the proper way. It's how TDD works. But if I just think in myself, I don't need this stupid example, because I'm abstract guy, you know. As long as I don't need to express myself, I cannot come up with example, because I don't need an example myself, only if I talk to some other guy.
You know what's the interesting case for that? Is when you write a test and you expect it to fail because you're pretty sure you don't have any code that does that yet. And it surprises you and it goes green. And you go, wait, what? How did that happen? So yeah, we could probably talk quite a lot about TDD, because it's a good topic.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sure. But therefore, for me, all these questions are related, because if I have practiced TDD in an ensemble situation, well, being alone, working alone is a different story.
So actually, I'm going to take this as like the last, if I might, because we're at about the bottom of the hour, which I think is our designated ending time. One of the things that, did I lose that thought? No, let me see. Oh, these different skills, TDD, BDD, pair programming, mob programming, they use each other, they depend on, or they leverage each other or enable each other. That's the level of understanding that usually doesn't happen right up front. It takes a little while for people to get their head around the correlation and the relationship between these different practices. Like, yeah, I can do TDD. And when I say, do you do test-driven development? They'll say, yeah, I write unit test. No, that wasn't the question. Do you write the test first? Well, someone else actually writes all the tests. I just do them. No, then you're losing out on the iterative nature of things and all these different things that sort of help one another. That's what a lot of people don't get up front. And that's great, because that's why we want to do more of it all the time. So thank you, everybody, for coming this evening. I hope that everyone got something of value from this evening.